Okay. Good afternoon, warriors, and welcome to another enlightening episode of the Mental Health Podcast, Voice for the Voiceless. Today, we have a very special guest. She is the author of the book Simply Deescalate and president in the North Carolina chapter of NAMI, which is also the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Fellow warrior and mental health advocate Tiffanie Herring. Welcome, Tiffanie.
Hey, thanks, Chris. I'm so excited to be here. I love the Facebook group. I'm loving the podcast and everything that you're doing. So I'm really excited that you chose to include me.
I appreciate you so much. This book was probably one of the best books I've read in a while. I myself did the crisis training and did the text line for a little bit. So a lot of it was like kind of refreshing. And then just like the little bits of you that you splashed in there was just terrific. I loved it.
Thank you.
So today we're just going to do a little simple interview, just kind of dissect the book without spoiling it for everybody.
Yeah.
So my first question for you is, being a crisis intervention team coordinator, which is your official title, right? What do you think is the most important part of your job?
Yeah, so my full-time job is training law enforcement and first responders on how to identify and intervene during mental health crises. So, and as you know, we'll get into a little bit, I come from a law enforcement family. So, representing law enforcement has always been really important to me. And the reputation in a lot of agencies and just really in America with law enforcement is not really good these days. And, there's a lot of reasons for that. We are addressing a lot of issues in our mental health care system with law enforcement, and that can sometimes not end so well. Officers really need to wear a bunch of different hats, right? So I think just being able to, and they're afraid a lot of times, everybody's afraid of what they don't understand.
Right.
So I think a lot of times whenever law enforcement are dealing with people who are suicidal, or maybe they're experiencing psychosis, right? Maybe they're hearing voices, or having some type of delusional thought and things just aren't really making sense. It's scary, right? I think really breaking that stigma a lot of times in this 40-hour training, and it is a very full week, but really breaking it down and saying, look, this is what's going on. This is a mental disorder. It's happening in the brain, just like any other disorder. And if we can recognize it and know how to respond, those situations are going to end so much more safely without lawsuits, without people getting hurt, without people going to jail. So there are a lot of reasons why, law enforcement agencies really need to get on board with the crisis intervention team training. And they are. We're seeing, a lot more trainings like this around the country, but especially now with everything that we're seeing going on, in America, it's more important now than ever.
Right. For me, I feel like the resources are just so hard to come across for so many people because, you got the healthcare issues and, just for somebody to be able to work with law enforcement, I think is super huge, because I know like there is a stigma with mental health. There's that stigma with, law enforcement, there's that red area of, it's a police officer, I don't want your help kind of thing. So it's great to see somebody like yourself work with them and, break the stigma of mental health.
Yeah.
So the 40-hour training that you coordinate throughout law enforcement and first responders, what do these courses entail of, and do you work with any kids?
Okay, well, it's a very full week. So we usually start the week off just talking about, we do like a mental health 101, where we're going to cover a lot of the basics: depression, anxiety, ADHD, OCD, bipolar disorder. We do learn a lot about, and a lot of different agencies across the United States are now using mobile crisis teams. So learning about the local mobile crisis service that might be local. We talk about substance use. We talk about intellectual and developmental disabilities. We talk about dementia, which isn't necessarily a mental illness, but it is affecting the brain. So you are going to see behaviors as a result of that. So really anything that's affecting the brain, how to, again, identify what's going on and what are the things that I need to say and do with a person who's living with this to help keep them calm and get them to the help that they need. And that's where the resources are really important too. So having different service agencies come in and say, hey, this is our agency, this is what we have to offer. And when law enforcement knows those resources, they can inspire hope in that moment when they are working with that individual. And they're saying, when someone's saying, I don't know if I want to be here anymore, I'm feeling suicidal. And that officer's like, oh, well, have you tried the suicide prevention, hotline? Have you tried the local mobile crisis team? Have you tried the, just being able to offer some of those things can inspire that hope. And I know we'll talk about hope here, later on, but hope is so important. So just being able to give individuals hope in that moment. But yeah, so we also do role play. We do a lot of, we'll have someone come in and they will get a scenario and they actually have to, portray those symptoms and what's happening. And that officer will come in and try to de-escalate that situation. And if they're saying and doing the right things, we'll be calm. If they're saying some trigger words, we're going to escalate. And so that's really fun. And I think the officers are usually the most nervous for that.
Right.
But I think they learn the most with just like hands-on experience. I know I really learn by hands-on experience. As far as working with kids, I have just with the book, I have started to kind of dip my toe in the water with kids. I am trying to figure out a way to take this information and convert it into like a children's book or something, because like I said, listening, empathy, all of those things are really important. So that's something that I'm kind of tossing that idea around with now. And, I did get an opportunity to go speak with some kids at a middle school a few weeks ago. And, not only did we talk about these skills, but we did have that conversation of, if something was wrong, if you were going through something, who could you go to? Right. And, I can go to my teachers. I can go to my guidance counselor. Someone say, oh, I don't like the guidance counselor. I wouldn't go to her. I would go to, right.
Right.
And so at the end of that conversation, they all kind of went back to class, and there's one little girl kind of hanging around, and she comes up to me and she's like, well, what if you do want to tell an adult, but you're afraid that, they might call child protective services, which is automatically like, whoop, red flag, like,
Yeah.
what's going on with this child? So being able to connect her with someone to speak with, making her feel safe, and finding out, a lot of things that were happening, that should not be happening in this little girl's life. But the fact that I was there, I presented this information, and she felt safe enough because of that conversation. These are conversations that need to be had. And I know we sometimes think that this is really adult content, but children become adults. And these are all things that they need to know now. So I definitely want to work a lot more with kids in the future.
I absolutely look forward to that day, because I'm telling you, the information that you put in this book alone, I mean, for me growing up, the resources weren't available when we were growing up. It was heavily stigmatized, where it's like, oh, well, if you're depressed, here's some medicine, or if you're suicidal, you're going to get locked up and get Baker acted. And that's just something that I myself have experienced, not speaking out and not being able to tell people, because, there's that stigma of, if you have any mental illness, you're quote unquote crazy according to society.
Right.
Just for the fact that you're wanting to work with those kids, I feel like people underestimate kids. I definitely feel like they know a lot more than we think.
They do. They're little sponges. They take in
Right.
everything.
And for a little kid you said middle school, right?
Mm-hmm.
For a little girl in middle school to be like, I'm scared to tell anybody what's going on in my life, that's definitely a red flag. But I'm glad you have aspirations to want to work with kids, because I think that's incredible.
Thank you.
So how long have you been working with NAMI, and what inspired you to volunteer advocate for them?
Yeah, so I learned about NAMI through CIT training, honestly. We always have usually a NAMI panel come into CIT training where we'll have people with lived experience share a little bit about their story. And that's always really important too, because law enforcement sees everyone at their worst, right? So seeing people in recovery and recognizing that, oh my gosh, people do get better. They need that, because sometimes they are so pessimistic, because, they might take someone to the hospital, or they might take someone to jail, and however that works out, they usually don't know, how that situation ends, or if that person does get help or does get better. So that's really important. I was involved with NAMI for about 2 years here locally. And then the president decided that the president and vice president actually decided they were going to step down, and they needed someone to kind of fill in that role. And I was kind of in the corner, like, okay, who's going to volunteer for this? And then finally someone was like, Tiffanie, you'd be great. And I'm like, okay. But I love it because NAMI and CIT go hand in hand. And for those of you who don't know about NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, it's a local grassroots agency. We're supported to just supporting people living with mental illness, as well as their caregivers for those living with mental illness. And there's still, it's hard to get people to these meetings too, Chris, I'll tell you, because just that hearing that, oh, Alliance on Mental Illness, and I'm going to go to a meeting, like, how am I, what are these people going to look like? And what are they going to think of me? And you go there and you're like, oh, wow, these are just people. These are just people. And, it's really just getting people in the door to some of these meetings. But, we have support groups for, alcohol and substance use disorder. You know what I mean? We need support groups for mental health just as much. And people feel so much better when they come to these meetings. We have peer support meetings for individuals with lived experience like myself. I'll share a little bit about that with you as well. And then we also have a family support group with caregivers who will come in, because if you love someone with mental illness, that can be very challenging. Your mental health is just as important. And I should mention too, that with CIT training, we really preach a lot of self-care as well. Law enforcement especially is at a higher rate of suicide. So when they come to training and we talk about mental health, sometimes it's like, oh, well, that's those people over there. But they not really having that understanding of, like, I am even more likely, because I'm a law enforcement officer, to have depression or anxiety or substance use disorder or become suicidal. They have higher rates of suicide. So it's not just them, it's us. And the more that we realize that we're more similar than we are different, that's really what hits it home. But I love NAMI. I love what we do. I would love to get, more people involved. And if you have a NAMI chapter, or if you want to just go to NAMI.org and try to find a local chapter, we're just people. We're just people looking for like-minded people who listen, because sometimes when you have a mental health issue, it's hard to find people who listen. Sometimes you're like, oh, I have anxiety. And they're like, oh, okay, well, what does that mean? Or they're like, oh, sure, anxiety. Everybody has anxiety these days. And I'm like, no, but that means something different for me. And the more you get like the eye rolls, or the people kind of dismissing you, or just like, well, just, suck it up. The more you start to close off. So, just having that outlet and that place to go is so important. So definitely, if you are interested in something like that, find your local NAMI chapter, because that help is really important. I know it does a lot for me to just get it out sometimes. Right.
I love the distinction that you made between the law enforcement and, that's over there, that's them people. I love how you just kind of brought it together and you're like, that's all of us. And we're all in this together, because I feel like as a society, it's just so important to remind everybody that, they're not alone, and that we're all in this fight together, whether it's somebody who has access to all the resources that are available or not. And it's so important to constantly like chirp in everybody's ear, be like, listen, like, I'm going through what you're going through, maybe, and not to the extent that you are, but I'm still going through it. And obviously that's met with a lot of dismissive responses. Suck it up is probably my favorite one.
And you don't have to know or have experienced exactly what that person's going through, right? I mean, when we talk about empathy, I might not have been through your exact situation, but I'm still a person. I have feelings, so I can relate to feeling scared or fear or shame or embarrassment or guilt. All of those things. I might not be able to say, I understand your situation, but I can understand how you being in this situation can be very, difficult for you, because I've felt that way before too.
Right.
And then, listening to each other is so important.
Absolutely. In your book, you mentioned your father was in law enforcement. Did he ever take you on any ride-alongs?
Yeah, it's so funny. I shared this old like Polaroid photo in training. It was like take your daughter to work day 1998 or something like that. And it's just like me sitting in the police station, and back in those days it was completely different, right? Like there's like a little ashtray sitting there, like where they were just in there smoking and doing their thing. But I've done ride-alongs, and I really think, because I have social anxiety. I've dealt with generalized anxiety disorder certainly my whole life. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 23. and after I had a nervous breakdown. But when I really step back and look at it, I can remember being in the 3rd or 4th grade and asking my mom to take me to the ER because my stomach hurt so bad. Oh, and I've had, intestinal issues and stomach issues my entire life, not knowing that they call the stomach the second brain.
Mhm.
So a lot of times whenever you have gastrointestinal things going on, sometimes that's your brain, and your stomach kind of communicating, like when you're nervous about something and you think about it and you kind of get that like that dip in your stomach, so I feel like I've had this my whole life, and having that social anxiety and watching my dad talk to people, I feel like that kind of taught me how to cope with it. You know what I mean? Because I'm very introverted, and a lot of people are like, no way. And I'm like, I do. I mean, I can turn it on, but it took a lot for me to be able to turn it on, and at the end of the day, I really like to recharge, by myself. So he did teach me a lot. We did do a lot of ride-alongs and things like that. And I've even done some ride-alongs as an adult too. But it's really interesting because, again, the law enforcement has to wear so many different hats, and they have to be the jack of all trades, going from, a robbery in progress to, a welfare check. Those are going to have 2 completely different responses. And so to go, from one to the other is sometimes difficult to transition. But again, it's something that they have to do, unfortunately. With the institutionalization, and a lack of places for individuals to go, shutting down, state-run institutions, we're addressing this issue with the criminal justice system. And so they're seeing it so much more, and the calls have increased. I mean, and I think we've always had, even whenever I in late 90s, early 2000s, riding along with my dad, we saw mental illness, but we just really didn't recognize it for what it is. You know what I mean? My dad had a woman who experienced psychosis, and she would always say, well, there's these ghosts in my house, and there's people in my attic, and now we would say, okay, well, I believe that's what you're experiencing. It sounds like we need to get you some help. Do you take medication? Back in those days, dad would have went in there and said, okay, hey, ghosts, hey, can you get out of the house and leave this nice lady alone? You know what I mean? But you're not addressing the core of the issue. So I think now that we are able to recognize it and know what it looks like, we can better respond to it too.
Right. The ghost thing kills me. That's a great story. But just to follow up that question, at what point did you know that you wanted to start helping people?
I was trying to think on this question, and honestly, it's always been who I am. I was born this way, baby. I don't know. I've always just, if there was a cause that I felt like it made sense, I wanted to get behind it. And I've always been that. I've always been a very intuitive person. I've always kind of really been able to distinguish what's right and wrong. And I've kind of just stuck with that, as opposed to going along with the crowd, because that can sometimes be very easily to do. I'm not very easily influenced. But I feel like I am passionate, and I, can influence other people in a good way. Just with, especially just de-escalation and these skills and communication is really what I'm all about.
Yeah.
I just feel like if we could learn to communicate better and talk to one another and try to build an understanding, that's really what it's all about.
Yeah.
So that's really the service that I want to provide to people from here on out, is just letting them know that, like, this isn't something we need to hide in shame for anymore. And we can understand each other if we just take the time to listen.
Absolutely. I feel like, it's such a great feeling when that passion is just like such a heavyweight in what you do, because there's something that I always, stress in every podcast that I do. And it's, there's so many resources out there, but there are even less the amount of people that want to help. They just be like, oh, well, let me just write your prescription or try doing this. Like, it's like they almost don't listen. So to hear somebody like yourself be so passionate about what you do and wanting to provide those resources for people, it's very inspiring, because I feel like a lot of people, when they look at this, this movement for mental health, they just kind of feel like, yeah, well, it's just a hashtag, or yeah, well, the therapist just there collecting a check. And I've heard all those things, and it's heartbreaking, but
Yeah.
it's definitely great to hear somebody that wants to actually help people, because that's why I made the group that I made. It's
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, it's just, it took me a long time to figure out what I was passionate about, how everything that I wanted to do was going to kind of come together in a way that I could help people. But you when you're on the right track, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like with you and your podcast, and there's always going to be people who step back and like, well, why is he doing that? Well, who does she think she is? You know what I mean? And you can, if you let those voices get to you, it can really push you away. But
Yeah.
I know that what I'm doing is important and I'm passionate about it. So no matter what, and the little like God signs, right? Like you inviting me on a podcast, or the woman inviting me to talk to those kids a few weeks ago, or someone giving me a shout out on their Facebook and posting about my book, all of those little things that you're like, okay, this is a sign that I'm on the right track.
Yeah.
And you just have to go with it. And
Right.
it makes me happy. So if I could get into all the negative as to why I shouldn't do it, but honestly, the only reason why I shouldn't do it would be because of what other people think,
Yeah.
so and that's really hard whenever you're trying to make a difference. Is sometimes you do get those people on the sidelines that aren't in the arena, as some might say, who are just watching, and you're trying to make a difference. But not everybody has that passion. Not everybody has passion in a fire like this, or something that, and really, I think that they're that way because they haven't found their passion or
Right.
haven't found their purpose yet. So it's so much easier to tear others down along the way to feel bigger. But the more that you support each other, you support me, I support you. That's what it's all about. The more that we can try to raise it and lift each other up, the more we're going to level up as well,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Okay. You mentioned 4 agreements as a communication blueprint to live by. We need to be impeccable with our words. Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumptions, and always do your best. Are these mentioned in any of your trainings?
So have you read the 4 agreements, Chris?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, this was like life changing when I read the 4 agreements. And that was years ago. That was before I even really got into the CIT training. And when I started getting into CIT training, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like the 4 agreements. This is what we're teaching. We want people to be impeccable with their words. Everything they say or do in that moment matters. Sometimes it is, funny when a law enforcement gets on a call and they see something and they're like, oh, I want to make this sarcastic remark, or, oh, I have this zinger, but is it going to help the situation?
Right.
There's a big difference between asking versus telling, right? If I'm like, hey, Chris, come here and sit down, you're going to be like, I don't really like the way she said that. But if I'm like, hey, Chris, you mind coming over here and having a seat for me? You know what I mean? I just said the same thing, but the way I said it, I put the ball in your court and I made it your choice. So you're going to be more likely to go along. So being impeccable with our words matter, and the way we say them, everything even our nonverbals, right? Looking at your watch, or looking at your phone, or, rolling your eyes, that communicates so much too, that, okay, this person really doesn't want to listen to me. So words are so important. Not taking anything personally. I don't know if I think I did mention this in the book with the woman I had to dress out, because I worked in jail and
Yeah.
jails and prisons for quite some time. But this lady was calling me everything but a white woman. I swear to you, she was cursing me up and down, and I'm standing back. And it could, if I was insecure, if I took it personally, I could have said, what, who do you think you're, what does that look like? I'm slamming her on the ground. Then I'm trying to put like an orange onesie on a grown woman. You know what I mean? Why? I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I would rather use my words in a way that are going to make you comply. It's like that that verbal judo, those Jedi mind tricks that I'm talking about. Like, you just change your words
Yeah.
and you get a completely different response. Not making assumptions. We can sometimes make a lot of assumptions. And then always doing your best. That's another thing I always really hit home with the CIT officers is, if you go into a situation, you're de-escalating with a negative mindset and you're like, this isn't going to end well. Okay, we're probably going to have to take this person to the hospital. This is probably going to be an involuntary, you know what I mean? If you go in with that mindset, that's usually what's going to happen. You will manifest that. So go in positive. I'm going to help this person. Okay, we've tried this. I've been on this call before, but you know what? We're going to try this time. Just really having a positive mindset going into these situations, like I am going to help this person. And a lot of times, I'd say 98% of the time, when you go into it with a positive attitude, it's going to end well.
Right.
Just because of the energy that you were putting into it.
Yeah. For me, I always feel like words are super important, how you word everything. So whenever I have my, monthly healing sessions and, we're talking about whatever's been going on since last time I saw her, I always correct myself when I say the word problem and I fix it with struggles. Because I'm like, it just sounds so like more negative than it really is to say problem than it is to say struggle. Yeah. So whenever somebody reaches out to me about what's going on, and it's just like, the way you word things to whatever situation that you're in is super important, because anything you can say can come off sarcastic. Anything you can say comes off aggressive. But if, like you said, if you go in there with a positive mindset, you don't make assumptions on the situation, you just try and use whatever experience that you have and try to input it with the situation you're trying to address. It makes things so much easier, especially with mental health stuff. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you how many conversations I've had with family members that I consider, just not great family members. And the situation just ended up being a lot calmer than it was 5-6 years ago when my brain wasn't self-aware of all the things that were going on around me. So I absolutely love the 4 agreements. I think it's a brilliant blueprint. And I think it's probably one of the coolest aspects that you added in there, because it's important for everybody to hear.
Yeah, I had someone, it was actually Major Sam Cochran, who developed CIT training in Memphis, Tennessee back in 1987. He was, at the forefront of that. And so I was talking to him a little bit about my book and what I was doing. And he did say, well, there's no such thing as new de-escalation. And I said, well, yeah, but how you present it, right? There's a lot of people that teach de-escalation, but the way I teach it, the way someone else teaches it, what I bring to the table, the 4 agreements, the high conflict people, self-care. You know what I mean? I don't think a lot of people really put de-escalation and self-care together, but if you want to be good at de-escalating someone, you have to be in a healthy headspace.
Absolutely. So I definitely felt like that was super important for me with the text line when I was doing that, because obviously, as you know, working with the crisis hotlines and things of that nature, you can't go in there, not on like 1 hour of sleep or just not ready for what's going to come, because being in a crisis situation and trying to help somebody is tremendously important that you're 100% there. You can't be like 90%. You got to be
absolutely. Especially when you're working with people, you know what I mean? I want, if I'm going for help, I want to have someone's full attention. If they're distracted, if they're tired, if they're, kind of paying attention over here, like I said, on their phone, they look distracted, I'm not going to feel like I can open up to you. And that's really what it's all about, is getting this person to open up. Let's talk, let's communicate, and let's get this figured out.
Absolutely. One of the most important parts of de-escalation that I've noticed was mentioned quite a bit was building rapport. Is there a right or wrong way to build rapport with somebody?
So, I always say, you use what you got. I say it's like fishing, you know what I mean? You're kind of going to like throw a line out and see what sticks. So, you're kind of like, well, what is this? Oh, well, this is a nice dog. What's your dog's name? Oh yeah, my dog, this might be the only thing that's keeping this person alive. If they're suicidal, maybe it is this dog. And if you kind of sense that, okay, well, what's your dog's name? How old is he? What kind of dog is it? I have a dog too, he's a lot smaller than this. Again, let's talk about dogs. Let's find some common ground here. Now, if you are building rapport, it's important to not talk too much about yourself. Now, if you've experienced a loss and I've experienced a loss, I can relate to you and empathize with you by saying, hey, I've lost my grandparent before too. That must be really hard. But then I want to know about you. Yeah. I want to know, well, where was your grandfather? Was he here? Was he in Florida? Did he live in another state? Did you get to see him a lot? What did you guys do for fun? Letting letting you talk about your grandfather and then maybe experience some of those memories. You know what I mean? That's really what's going to help you, as opposed to me just over here like, oh, well, I was really close with my grandfather when he passed. He used to have these grapevines in his backyard. We used to go out there and he had horses. And now you're like, wait a minute, Tiffany, like I'm the one that had the loss. We're not talking about your grandfather.
Yeah.
So I just think whenever it comes to building rapport, you just want to make sure that you're constantly putting the conversation back on that person, asking open-ended questions. Because I mean, how many times have you just talked to someone? And I mean, I have friends that call me. I have two of my two best girlfriends from back home, and they're my go-to if something is wrong. And I'm their go-to, and they'll call me and they'll be, venting about something. Da, 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 and I'm, what? What? Right, you're trying to like interrupt the whole time, and then I have to be like, Tiffany, shut up, like let's just let them talk, because sometimes we just want to jump in. But how much better do you feel when you've just vented and got it all out? And sometimes you're like, oh, well, thanks. You made me feel so much better. Thank you for your advice. And you're like, I didn't give you any advice. I just sat here and said, like those minimal encouragers, right? That's all you really need to do a lot of times in that moment, is just making that eye contact, shaking your head, let that person know, hey, I'm still here. I'm following you. And sometimes, you might be talking and you stop. And instead of me immediately coming with a follow-up question, I pause for like 4 or 5 more seconds. And then you might say, oh, and then also, so I get more to the story because you've had that 4 or 5 seconds to kind of reflect. And in that reflection, you've discovered something else that you want to say.
Right.
So again, it's just kind of listening. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth. We want to be listening more than we talk, and just putting putting it back on that person to really be able to get it all out.
I feel like the trickiest part for a lot of people when building rapport with somebody is that comparison struggle that I feel like everybody has. It's just like, I broke my leg. Yeah, I broke my leg last month, and I also broke my back, leg, arm, and whatnot. It's it's so hard to talk to some people because they're so bullheaded and just like they want to do nothing but make it a competition. And I'm sure you've experienced that. I know I definitely have. So that I think that's one of the biggest reasons I was seeing if there was a wrong way to build it, because I feel like that.
So this is interesting. There's actually there's a sociologist by the name of Charles Derber,
Right.
And he calls this conversational narcissism.
Mm-hmm.
And now we don't like that word narcissism, right? But this is something that we all do. We can all be narcissistic from time to time. So conversational narcissism, like if you and I were just going to go to lunch, right? We're getting to know each other. We're going to find our common interests. You know what I mean? You're going to say, oh, I like horses. And I'm like, oh, you know what? I really like horses too. Well, what was your horse name? Oh, well, I had this kind of, you know what I mean? We're going to kind of be going back and forth because we're playing off of each other and we're learning about each other. But whenever you're working with someone in a crisis situation, this is no longer a conversation. This is de-escalation. So I need to put it on you. I need to let you talk, and I need to listen. And all of those, those feelings to want to just stop in like, oh, I have something to say. Well, sometimes you have to consciously stop yourself and say, let me just listen. Let me just let this person get it out, because that's what this is really all about in de-escalation is, what does this person have to say? Because they're the one that's struggling and needs help right now.
Right. Yeah. That's definitely that word's a buzzword for so many people, narcissism. It's something that I feel like is one of the hardest parts of de-escalation, is dealing with a narcissist in a crisis, because are they telling me the whole story? Are they telling me what they want me to hear? Like, how do I help this person without putting myself in a poor mental health state? It's a great distinction, and it's something I feel like a lot of people definitely needed to hear. One very important part of your book that really stood out to me, you mentioned most people listen to just respond and not try and understand. Why do you think that is?
Again, because we're human, because, we just really want to relate to each other. A lot of times whenever I am talking about me, I might think that I'm helping you, when I'm really not. And sometimes it can feel like we're trying to one up each other. I think you kind of mentioned something similar to that, like, oh, well, you might have it this bad, but let me tell you about this. But, a crisis is self-defined, right? So a crisis to you, it might not be a crisis to me. My breaking point, my threshold might be a little higher than yours. We're all different. We're all going to respond to different situations differently based on our experiences. So I'm sorry. I have like five. This is my anxiety. Like 5 things flying in my head right now, and I'm like overload. What was our question? Come back to our question.
So it was just asking why do you think people listen just to respond instead of trying to understand each other?
Yeah. It just comes down to that again, that just conversational narcissism, and that again, it isn't purpose. It isn't on purpose.
Right.
But it just happens from time to time. It takes these de-escalation skills. Like I tell these officers, you can come here for the whole week. But if you don't practice this, you're going to lose it.
Absolutely.
So it really does take a conscious effort to take a step back and say, okay, I need to put the attention on this person and be listening a lot more.
Right. Do you feel like social media has that influence on a lot of people of why they don't try to understand what somebody's going through? They just go in there for the like and just keep scrolling kind of situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think social media is so great, right? But it also can really separate us in a lot of ways too. A lot of, but also I think doing what's comfortable for the other person. If the other person is going to be, more comfortable communicating on social media, I'm going to do what feels more comfortable to you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it all comes down to that communication. It really does. And the way I communicate, the way you communicate, we have obviously the suicide prevention hotline, but we also can text there, right? Because some people are going to want to text more than they're going to want to talk on the phone. So, but getting that help is important regardless of how you want it. And the fact that there are so many options, you don't even have to go to a therapist in person. You can see somebody,
Right.
virtually now. Some people love that. Especially the ones with social anxiety like myself. I'm like, oh, cool, let's do this Zoom. But, there are some people who are like, I need that connection. I need to be face to face with this person. I want them to be local. I want to go to their office, and that's fine too. So really just whatever's working for the person.
Just a kind of like off the cuff question that I didn't have written down, but do you feel it's important to adjust to somebody's communication style when you're de-escalating?
Yeah, really important. I know that you had mentioned autism in one of these questions. Obviously that person's going to need to be spoken to a little bit differently, and depending on, right, autism is a spectrum.
Right.
So you may have people who are completely nonverbal. You may have some individuals who know sign language. You may, talk to someone nonverbal trying to get their phone number and they can't tell you, but if you hand them your cell phone, they're able to punch their phone number in like that. So everybody communicates differently, and we do have to adjust our tactic. Now, one thing I say is, especially with children, sometimes we tend to talk down to children. But really, we have to show them that respect, you know what I mean, in order for them to feel confident. That's like with giving options, even to kids. If you have a small child and it's snack time, and you're like, hey, what do you want for snack? And they say, oh, I want ice cream. And you're like, oh, well, you can't have ice cream. And then they're mad, right? And they're stomping their feet. Well, you just asked me what I wanted and I said ice cream. As opposed to, okay, it's snack time. Do you want, some apples and peanut butter, or do you want some celery and cream cheese? You know what I mean? Giving them options, putting the ball in their court, and then letting them say, okay, I want apples and peanut butter. They were able to make that choice, and now they're feeling more confident because you put the ball in their court. You weren't telling them to do something. You asked them to do something, and you kind of bypass that whole tantrum from, what do you want? Because it's more narrowed down and specific. So again, it's just everything that you say and do in those situations are going to be really important.
Yeah, that language to just anybody is so important whenever you're giving them options. I feel like is very helpful. Actually, that's one of my favorite parts of the book when you said, giving somebody options versus what do you want kind of thing. Like I always think of, that joke meme with the Notebook, when it's like, what do you want when you're asking somebody for dinner? And
Yeah.
when you're giving somebody an option, it just makes things so much, the conversation's a lot smoother.
Yeah, and I mean, if we're talking about a mental health crisis, and law enforcement has a lot of leverage, right? So, and you never want to use jail as a threat, right? So I wouldn't want to say, oh, well, you need to go, you need to see the mobile crisis team or else you're going to go to jail. Which one would you, it's then that sounds threatening, right? So, maybe again, just word it a little differently. Well, technically you are trespassing and there is, a crime here, but we really want to get you help today. So what I'd like for you to do is see the mobile crisis team.
Right.
Which one do you think is going to be best for you? And it's all just in the presentation.
I love that. I love that. That's incredible. Um, Throughout every chapter I've read, I feel self-awareness should be number one in terms of addressing someone in crisis, then just in life, really. Do you feel that self-awareness can help someone essentially avoid reaching crisis?
I think that's really what it's all about.
Yeah.
I mean, being self-care is self-aware, and just again, a little bit more about myself and my history. I had a nervous breakdown at work when I was 25 years old. I was very young. I was working shift work. I was working from 7 p.m. till 7 a.m. Inside of a jail. I would get off at 7 a.m. I would go to an 8 a.m. class at ECU's campus. I would stay there till 3 in the afternoon, maybe go home and sleep a little bit. I really didn't sleep a whole lot. I've always had alarm anxiety. I'm afraid I'm going to sleep through an alarm and not make it, so I never really fall asleep. I also have insomnia where, I might, if I fall asleep, I'm going to wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning, and then I'm going to sit there for the next 3 or 4 hours trying to fall asleep because my brain's like, oh, it's time to wake up now. And my body's like, no, I need this sleep. So when I had that nervous breakdown, I had to learn a lot about myself.
Mm.
And I now know the hours of sleep that I need a night to function. I know that, and I was on so many medications, Ambien, Tramadol, Flexeril, Xanax. I mean, just a variety of medications that I was getting just to function. And when I left that environment, when I was able to get sleep at night, when I was able, really for me, it was addressing my insomnia,
Mm.
because I had been on different types of anxiety medications throughout my life, but I wasn't sleeping. So
Mm.
I finally saw a provider that listened to me, which is also very important because we have so many doctors that you go and you sit down and they're like, oh, well, you need this. Okay, here you go. Have a nice day. Like, no, I want you to just listen to me.
Yeah.
So now that I have a provider that actually sits down for 15 or 20 minutes and is just like, Tiffanie, how are you doing? How's life? How's your husband? That's really important too. And so she said, I think that if we could address sleep for you, you might be less anxious throughout the day. I don't know. We can still consider some type of medication for anxiety, but let's try to get you sleeping. And so that was probably about 2 or 3 years ago. And honestly, since I sleep at night, I am less anxious throughout the day. Now,
Right.
that's not to say that I might not. I'm also very happy. I just got married recently. I'm kind of still in the
Congratulations.
honeymoon stage. Thank you. Work's going good. So I'm really happy. But that's not to say that life's full of peaks and valleys, right?
Yeah.
There might come a day where I'm down in that valley and I'm going to go to my doctor and say, hey, you know what? I'm feeling anxiety again. Maybe, and I have experienced one depressive episode in my life. I'm a very positive person, so a lot of mine has been more so anxiety, but I have been stuck in that depression before too. But I think really just being self-aware and knowing that I'm doing really good right now. Yeah, I am on that mountain, but there is someone that's in that valley.
Yeah.
And I need to be able to extend a hand and say, hey, I know what it's like down here. And how can I help you get back to the top of this mountain?
Right.
So self-awareness is so important. And really just being able to be vulnerable,
Right.
and honest is going to be really important too. The moment I started being honest, is when life started getting better because I was so afraid for so long. Well, what if so-and-so thinks this? Well, what if such and such, they're going to think I'm crazy, right? That's the word everybody uses. I think I'm crazy. And it scares a lot of people. I mean, even, when I talk to people about NAMI sometimes and I say what we do and they're like, oh, well, we need to send Tom over there to you. And, I'm thinking to myself, you're saying that as a joke, you're saying like, oh, well, Tom's crazy. He needs to come to NAMI. And so I usually just say, well, we're opening and accepting to everyone. There are a lot of people who experience, mental health concerns, and I just kind of flip it. But yeah, really just being able to be honest and have those conversations. And I'll tell you what, I work with so many people and I meet so many people some days who are not ready to have that conversation yet. They're not capable of having that. And they have to do it in their own time. But the moment that I started self-care and taking care of myself and being honest is whenever I became more self-aware.
And I feel like, like you mentioned with the provider actually being able to listen to you is incredibly important. When I first booked my appointment with my doctor, on the application, they ask about mental health stuff, and it kind of threw me off because I'm like, I don't remember that ever being in any doctor's office that I've ever experienced. And when she finally came in and she was going over the application, everything that I wrote down, she's like, you wrote here that you're struggling with your mental health. And then she asked me like questions, are you seeing a therapist or anything like that? And it's great to see that there's people taking those steps into, oh, well, maybe this person does need help and we're not going to jump right to medication, like you said. And it's so hard to be vulnerable about mental health struggles, especially when it comes to what you're dealing with internally, because not a lot of people try to understand what you're going through. So,
and it's a journey, they say the mental health journey, it really is a journey, because it took me 7 years just to find the right combination of therapy, medication, what works for me. And so many times people get so frustrated along the way that they're like, well, I'm not going to be medicated, or, I know I have this side effect, but I'm going to take this medication to, make this side effect go away, when there could be a whole medication altogether that doesn't have that side effect, but then that means going back to the doctor, getting on new medication, and it can be challenging.
Yeah.
But whenever you find that right combination of what works for you, that's, and you have to get there, as frustrating it is, you have to find that, because when you get there, life is so much more worth living.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's good to see that there's doctors out there that are willing to take those steps with people, because it's really hard to find that in today's society, especially with people making assumptions every single day. And when somebody walks in, oh, well, this person looks like they're depressed, so they must be depressed, or they don't think of maybe they're having a bad day. It's always jump to right to depression or right to whatever stigma that there is around mental health. So it's definitely.
And unfortunately, doctors and nurses, they go to school to learn about how to heal the body. They don't learn enough about the mind. So
Right.
it really just comes down to a lack of understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, with, the lack of services and lack of places for individuals with mental health concerns to go, they end up in our hospitals and ERs.
Wow.
And when they're there, you have a nurse who, is probably overwhelmed, right? She's probably tired. It might be night shift that she's working, and she's got a gentleman over here with a heart attack who's coding, and you've got little Timmy over here who, fell off his bike and needs stitches in his head. And now you're here because you're depressed. Really? Oh, and you're going to kill yourself. Okay. Right. And you get that attitude. And then this person came to the hospital for help.
Yeah.
And really, it's just, they don't have enough training to understand it, or to know how to respond, or even to recognize that this here is a part of our body.
Right.
Physical and mental health play a huge role, and this can be sick just like any other place in the body. And so mental health first aid training or de-escalation training, that's really where I want to go to from here. I love training law enforcement, but if you Google de-escalation or de-escalation books on Amazon, the first 10 books that are going to come up are all going to be related to law enforcement. Mm-hmm. But what about our public transit workers who deal with people who, need help getting to appointments, who may go into crisis? What about those nurses? What about the teachers who are working with those students who, need de-escalation? What about pastors or chaplains, or people who work with people come to them all the time who are struggling? What are the things that I say or do? So I've made some way with getting this book to pastors and things like that too. So, the more that I learn, and the more that I get out there and I kind of talk about this stuff, the more that I'm like, everyone needs to know these skills. This needs to be common knowledge.
Absolutely. Anxiety seems to be a big struggle when someone is in crisis. You touched a little on things like social anxiety and how one could approach someone with anxiety during a crisis. Do you think one specific tool could work for all, or do you feel like it's always circumstantial?
so when we say anxiety, I feel a lot of times when we say anxiety and people don't know enough about it, they automatically think like a panic attack,
Right. It's so
you know?
generalized. Right.
Right. And there's so many different types of anxiety, right? So I think it really has to do with response.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're having a panic attack, and one of the things we try to avoid is, calm down, just calm down, calm down, calm down, or relax, just
And you'll be
relax, relax,
okay.
relax, 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 and you say that so many times and the person isn't calming down or the person isn't relaxing. And so, if I see that you're having a panic attack, you're okay, take a deep breath. Let's breathe together. Breathe with me. Do you want to have a seat? All right. I love getting people to sit down. When you talk about de-escalation and bringing it down, having it sitting down actually brings things down.
Right.
And then, this person's breathing with me and then keeping a low tone, you're going to be okay. You're going to get through this is really what it's all about. Now, social anxiety, generalized anxiety, some of these other anxiety disorders are going to look a little bit different. With social anxiety disorder, I know for me, if I was going to socialize with people, it had to involve drinking because I needed to, kind of just feel like, yeah, not feel so uptight or kind of get out of my head where I'm like, oh, well, I said this, so how are they going to take that? When a lot of times when you're drinking, you actually say a lot of stupider stuff, but you do see a lot of, substance use with anxiety disorders.
Right.
And then generalized anxiety. I mean, that's my diagnosis. It's really just worrying about everything all the time. And, I just had to I think with anxiety, it's really that positive mindset is so important too.
Absolutely.
Because the moment that I notice that I'm feeling stressed or I'm feeling upset about something, obviously that anxiety is gonna, come to the forefront.
And then
I
that
don't know.
kind of comes with like the self-awareness of what your body's starting to feel.
Yeah. Yeah. When and then immediately going into that self-care, or having like an action plan. Like when I start feeling like this, I need to do this. I'm going to get a cold drink of water. I'm going to walk around my backyard. I'm going to put my feet in the grass. I'm going to listen to the birds for a minute. I'm going to go take a bubble bath. You know what I mean? When you start realizing those triggers are setting you off, you need that self-care even more.
Yeah. Right.
And then when self-care doesn't work, or if it doesn't work, okay, well, that's when it's time to make an appointment with your provider. And that's okay. It's okay if self-care isn't working and you need to go to your doctor and say, hey, I'm experiencing this. I've been on medications many times throughout my life, and there's been times where I'm feeling good and I can go off of them for a while. That's not to say that there's something situational that might come up that I'm like, you know what, I need to get back on medication again. So it's really different for the person. There are some people who are going to need to stay on medications, long term in order to, do well. So it really, again, it's just so individualized. But self-care, I can't preach that enough. So
Yeah.
important.
For me, I always feel like once people are kind of like at that point where nothing's working and they kind of, go right to giving up, and it's just like, yeah, I don't want to go to the doctors because they're just going to do this or they're just going to give me that. And like you said, sometimes you just need to go to the doctor just to see what you can change about, your diet or your lifestyle or whatever it is. And like you said, self-care is, super important. And it's funny. That's probably one of the buzzwords every podcast I've used so far is self-care. I can't preach that enough either, because it's so important to take care of yourself, not only physically, but mentally. And I feel like if you don't have a little bit of both, it's tough, because a lot of people, those gym heavy people were like, oh, well, I'm going through this, so I'm just gonna, go pump some weights and here and there. But they fail to try and understand that if you're struggling with anxiety or you're struggling with depression, it's not as easy as just going out the door and going to the gym and you're going to feel better. Like some people will stay in bed for 3 days and they can't help that. Yeah. And there's always that lack of understanding. I always feel like when it comes to people having anxiety.
And I think sometimes it's a lack of options. When people are in crisis or they're stressed, sometimes they can't see those options. And that's why it's so important as somebody coming in to help or de-escalate to lay it out for them. Like, this is what we can do right now.
Right.
And when we think about something, like people questioning the value of their life and suicide, is it really that far-fetched? I mean, I've never been suicidal to the point where I've thought of a plan and like, this is what I want to do, but I've been at points in my life where I'm like, what is my purpose? What is my meaning? Why am I even here? You know what I mean? So I feel like everybody goes through that at some point in their life. And when you're faced with that question, you weigh your options. And for some people, when they start asking themselves, okay, here's my dilemma. What am I going to do? I don't like my job. I can get a new job. I can go back to school. And if you're in that negative mindset, well, I probably won't be able to get another job. I don't make a whole lot of money anyway. I can't go to school. I'm not smart enough. I can't afford school. I should probably just kill myself. I mean, honestly, they're weighing their options. And when none of those other options seem realistic, suicide can become an option. And
Right.
truly, suicide, we are all, one traumatic event away from potentially being suicidal ourselves. And we've all been affected by suicide. And with how prevalent it is in our society, we're all affected by it. And because we know people who've died by suicide, it actually puts us at an increased risk of suicide because we know people who've died by suicide. I'm kind of getting off on a tangent here, but there's a really great study, University of Kentucky, by a woman named Julie Searle. And she said that of one suicide death, there are going to be 135 people who are going to be affected by one death by suicide. Now, there are going to be some folks who, maybe these were coworkers, maybe they were acquaintances, didn't really know the person, but because that person died by suicide, it is going to mess them up for a while. Maybe my office was next to this guy's, and now I'm going to go to work for the next month, seeing that empty desk until they can get his position, a new person in there, but there are going to be 11 of those 135 individuals who are going to have devastating effects on their life, who that one death by suicide is going to affect them throughout their entire life. So who are those 11 people? They're going to be who was closest to the individual: parents, children, brothers, sisters, best friends. So that's why it's so important that we address mental health and that we start to make people feel okay about saying, I'm not okay. And even to the point where I'm feeling suicidal. Because if we can't have those conversations, people are going to continue to hide it in shame, and people are going to continue to die. And that is going to affect all of us.
Yeah. And like you said, the lack of options for some people is super, that's gigantic. And something that, I know in the back of my head, what you said about the lack of options is, why that happens. And a lot of people don't try to understand that these people don't have those options that people are suggesting. And suicide has been something that has affected me in my life. And, not to make anything about myself, but, I'm a survivor, and I did this movement, I did the podcast and everything, and it's going well. It's good to put yourself out there. It's good to let everybody know that they're not alone. And I feel like in terms of, de-escalation or mental health or, suicidal individuals, it's important to preach that message that you're not alone, and it's okay to feel the way that you're feeling, but just know that there are options for you to be okay again. And thank you so much for touching on suicide, because I feel like it's such a taboo subject, and it's such a hard conversation to have. So I greatly
but even just thinking about, someone like you who has that story, who can lay it all out there, like, yes, this happened to me. This was my struggle. This is how I got through it. You give a safe space for someone else who's struggling to say, Chris went through this. I can go to him, because you were honest about it. And they may know 5 other people who've experienced, who have tried to complete suicide or attempted, or right, but they're not talking about it. They're keeping it quiet. They're hiding in shame. But when someone is feeling suicidal and they know that there are people who've been through that who are talking about it, that makes it a little less taboo. That makes it okay to reach out and say, hey, Chris, you know what? I've been struggling. I know you were here. You make people feel safe by having these conversations, because these are real feelings. This is what people, and people who say they've never experienced this stuff are completely full of it, in my opinion. No, life is not perfect for anyone, no matter how, perfect it may seem. We're always going to be struggling with things. And Absolutely. We need to know that it is okay not to be okay, and find those people who are gonna, and I know you mentioned family, same way. I have people in my family who really understand, and then I have people who, aren't going to be so sensitive, or kind of like, well, I don't understand that stuff, right? So it's really just about finding your people and finding your tribe, and that's that's how we support each other. That's how we lift each other up and hopefully prevent
Yeah,
a suicide from happening.
absolutely. Like I said, I greatly appreciate you bringing up that conversation. Very taboo subject. I love the topic that you brought up about personal space with the autistic young man and mentioned the Autism Society. Do you work with any special needs communities?
Um, No, I wouldn't say necessarily with the de-escalation, but we do go out on site visits during crisis intervention training. We go to the Autism Society. They have a psychosocial rehab very close to the community college that we work at. It is absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal, the work that they're doing there, helping them socialize, they learn in a different way. You know what I mean? People think that individuals with autism are not intelligent, and that's not the case. Many of these folks are highly intelligent. They just learn a different way.
Yeah.
So they work with all of these individuals to help them with these skills. There was actually one individual too. If you know about autism, sometimes you have people who do self-injurious behavior. There was a young man that I had met there who was banging his head, and he had a tendency to go to, like brick walls and start banging his head. So you think about traumatic brain injuries, you think about something else that could happen as a result of that. They actually worked with him. They had a room with some padding on the wall and a pillow on the wall. So whenever he was stressed, and it was when he was triggered, it was when something happened and he was really upset, he didn't have the words to communicate how he was feeling. So he would react with self-injurious behavior. But the fact that then he was able to go and use a pillow as opposed to a wall, you know what I mean? That helped him, not get injured or hurt. So really just the little things that they put in place to help individuals live better lives is really phenomenal.
That's incredible. That's really interesting. Excuse me. That's really interesting to know that they have a center like that to help them communicate with all the things that they're going through that they can't exactly express like you or I could. And have you ever worked with anybody in a crisis that had the mental challenges, like the mental health challenges?
Yeah. I would say as far as intellectual and developmental disabilities go,
Yeah.
I would say, and especially if we're talking autism specifically, individuals, a lot of times you need to find a special interest.
Okay.
If you can find a special interest, because I know of an individual, his special interest is washer and dryers. Washer and dryers. So if he's in a crisis, if he's worked up, all you got to say is, hey, tell me about your washer and dryer. And he immediately, that's his thing. Oh, I have a Maytag. What kind do you have? Kenmore? Do you have a matching set? Why don't you have a matching set? But that immediately is talking about something that they love. Trains, Paw Patrol. I've talked about so many different things. Just finding that one thing builds that trust, and a lot of times that rapport.
Yeah.
And then you're better able to kind of intervene and get them the help that they need.
So essentially, it's kind of like finding that common ground just to see
finding common ground.
Yeah,
yep.
I like that.
Yep. And we also being careful with your language again too, right? Depending on who I'm talking about. If I say, well, I can't think of it off the top of my head. Someone with autism might be like, off the top, like they don't, it's kind of beyond their understanding, or it's raining cats and dogs outside. They take things like that very literal.
Right.
And they might giggle like, oh, she said it's raining cats and dogs, thinking I literally mean that it's raining cats and dogs, when I really mean it's raining very heavy, right? So again, just the way they communicate can sometimes be a little bit different. And then always keeping in mind that, folks may be nonverbal. They may use sign language. They may be able to, if you give them a pad and a piece of paper, they might be able to write down their address. That's something else to keep in mind with folks with autism too, is that a lot of times they can wander.
Yeah.
If they wander, two places to look: water, bodies of water. They are attracted to bodies of water. And we have seen a lot of, I should say young people, but individuals with autism of all ages who can't swim, who are attracted to water, who end up drowning. And I cannot tell you how many, at least two cases that I can think of an individual with autism who was attracted to train tracks, who do not think that trains are dangerous, and unfortunately they get injured and killed.
Wow.
So train tracks and bodies of water are two places to, if you are searching for someone with autism, to go to, because that typically seems to be where they wander.
That's I didn't even know that was a thing. That's crazy. I couldn't even, wow. That's something.
Yeah.
Um, thank you for that. It's very, very informational. One of my best friends, they deal with autism, and it's a struggle to try and communicate with him sometimes of what you're going through, because he doesn't 100% understand, conversations that we have. So you kind of gotta, like you said, language matters.
Mhm.
So it's super important to try and talk to him in the style that he can process and be able to communicate back with you. So it's good to know that there's resources out there for them to seek, or for their family members to give to them in order
Yeah.
to deal with whatever struggles they're going through.
Yeah, and also, behavior and sensory responses are sometimes a little bit different. They may have an incredibly high pain tolerance.
Mm.
I know of an individual who whose little boy came in from out in the yard playing, and had just a little bite on his arm, and she's like, "Oh, just a little bug bite, mosquito bite. Let's put some, something on it, and send him to bed." Woke up the next morning, this child's arm was black from the shoulder down. He'd been bitten by a copperhead. Now
Oh,
he obviously didn't realize that it was dangerous. He had tried to actually, but we later found out, pick the copperhead up, because he doesn't know, the danger in that.
yeah.
He got bit, it didn't hurt, so he wasn't able to communicate that something bad had happened, or that he had been bit by that snake. So they can have incredibly high pain tolerance. And I tell that to law enforcement too, because if for some reason you do have to put your hands on an individual with autism, it's very easy to break bones, dislocate shoulders, things of that nature, because they have such a high pain tolerance, and they will not even realize that they're injured.
Wow.
So, and I would say to anybody who wants more information about this, definitely contact your local autism society. They have organizations all across the country, and they will come and do trainings like this for you, and kind of let you know a little bit more of what it looks like and how to communicate with individuals like this.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Um, so you have the abbreviation BIFF, or BIF for short, which stands for brief, informative, friendly, and firm. Thought this was such a useful piece of information, because I know myself and many others struggle with narcissistic people in their life. Do you feel like they are the toughest to help in a time of crisis?
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes we confuse like narcissistic qualities and narcissistic personality disorder. But I will say that with narcissism, with borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, really just personality disorders in general, the common theme across the board is that lack of empathy. A lot of times those individuals, it's about them, and I feel like, and you may be the same way, I feel like I'm very emotionally intelligent. I'm very sensitive. So feeling other people's I mean, that's really a gift. It truly is a gift. Some people really cannot see things from another person's perspective, right? We say all the time, well, just try taking a walk in their shoes. And you kind of can get into that headspace of, okay, well, yeah, if I was going through this, if I was this person doing that, and there are some people who actually struggle with that, with
Yeah.
seeing the world from another person's perspective. They can only see things from their perspective. So I would say that's probably what makes narcissists and individuals with kind of some of those diagnoses more difficult to work with, is the fact that they lack empathy, and they lack sometimes that insight to know that, they don't typically go, they may have mental health struggles themselves, especially if it's a personality disorder, they may be feeling depression and anxiety as a result of that. But actually having people like that go to the doctor and get help, a lot of times it's challenging, because, oh, no, it's not me, it's everybody else, right? That lack of insight is can be a barrier to getting
Right.
help themselves.
I also feel like, when they're in that time of crisis, and, say like it's a domestic crisis, and I feel like, oh, they tell their side of the story, and nothing, nothing else of the information that they need to give out. They just, oh, well, so and so did this to me, and that's it. Like, they just unprovoked, they
Yeah.
attacked me, kind of thing. And I've seen it with kids that deal with narcissistic parents. I myself, same situation. And growing up, it was hard to tell other people what was going on in my household because my parents would be like, "Oh, that never happened," or they would gaslight you
Mhm.
and make you believe that everything you were saying never happened, that it was a
Right.
lie. So I feel like if they're in a crisis situation and you're dealing with them on the hotline or the text line, it's hard to move past the fact that they might be only giving you pieces of information that they want you to hear. Um, I feel like that's super tricky for a therapist to deal with a narcissistic person too, just because.
Well, and that's that's kind of the goal, in de-escalation, when after you've kind of built rapport and empathize and listen, the goal is to, um, get this person to the help that they need. So, a lot of times that's coming up with a win-win. I
Yeah.
touched on that in the book is, what does this person want and what do I want? You
Mhm.
know, I need this person to get help. This person is telling me that they haven't ate in 2 days and they really want a sandwich. Okay, well, I'll tell you what. Let's compromise here. That's what it's about, right? How about we go over to that McDonald's over there? I'll get you a Big Mac. We'll sit and hang out. I'll call mobile crisis. They can be here in about 2 hours, and we can get you some help. They can talk to you, right? So that person is getting something that they want. They're getting a meal. They're getting something to eat, and I'm getting something that I want because this person is then going to accept the help that I need.
Yeah.
Now, if you again lack that empathy or you're a narcissist, you're not going to easily want to compromise or come to a win-win, right? When that's really the common goal. Sometimes we have to give a little something up to gain something.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like that's super, super tough when you're talking about a narcissistic person too, because it's the compromise is always in their favor. It's kind of like what they want. And,
Right.
the win-win thing, like you say, is super important, but it's also hard to uh, feel accomplished with a narcissistic person because you feel like, am I helping this person or am I enabling their behavior kind of thing?
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
Um, So self-care is one important thing I try to bring up in every podcast, as we spoke on earlier. You touched on it in such a helpful way, and I had no idea these breathing methods existed. And the abbreviation MEDS, which is meditation, exercise, diet, and sleep. Do you practice any of the mentioned self-care?
I do. I do everything pretty good except for meditation.
Right.
Meditation is one of those things that, um, if it's something that you have to meditate the same way that you would like go to the gym, right? If I was like, hey Chris, go run 2 miles, you might not be able to do that. But if I give you 2 weeks, you'll start out, maybe you'll run a quarter mile and then a half mile, and you kind of build up to it. It's really the same with meditation. It takes time. There are a lot of thoughts coming in, especially for someone like me, who has anxiety. You have a lot of thoughts coming in, so you have to actually sit, quietly and try to consciously push those out, and it takes work.
Yeah.
And maybe I sit down and it's hard and I do, just 5 minutes, and I'm just going to do 5 minutes every day in the morning for a week. And then, next week, maybe I'll work my way up to 10 minutes and 15 minutes. But the more there's so much good research on meditation and how it benefits the body. I mean, we see monks living over in other countries who are living to like 120, 130 years old. And you're like, what? How is someone living that long? And I mean, it's lifestyle. They live by that meds.
Yeah.
They'd use that meditation. They're eating, a lot of things that the monks say is touching your food, right? They say don't play with your food, but the monks are like, play with your food, touch it, experience it. Like this is a life experience. What you're about to eat and what you're about to put in your body is going to become a part of you. And so yeah, it's all important. It's also important exercising, getting outside, even if it's just for a 30-minute walk in nature. I mean, it doesn't have to be grueling, but if you just do one thing every day, and especially if you are struggling and maybe you've dealt with depression and been in bed for a few days, even if you can just get yourself to go and sit out on the porch, in the sunshine, maybe sitting in the rocking chair for a couple minutes, you know what I mean, and working up to it. But that's really important too. And then sleep, we've already talked, a lot about that too. So sleep is incredibly important. And a lot of times, the signs of those mental health crises occurring can be because we're just not sleeping enough.
Right.
And we
Yeah.
really need that rested sleep to be able to function and be well throughout the day.
Yeah. I feel like the most challenging one out of the four mentioned is, like you said, meditation, because I myself, I've tried meditation. I can't sit still, or my brain just doesn't ever be quiet. And I kind of put that with sleep as well, because when you have that anxiety, it's just like, oh well, what color was that jacket yesterday? And your brain just comes
Yeah,
up with different scenarios.
right.
It's so hard to practice just all four of these, because I feel like they kind of all run into that like rabbit hole of all the struggles you have in your life, like exercise. Obviously very beneficial. It helps you become better physically, and mentally it's been proven that exercise can help you mentally too. But when you have like that trigger, and
Yeah.
people like to make a joke about the word triggers, obviously, as you know.
Mhm.
But triggers are something that so many people underestimate, because you don't know how hard that can hit one person.
Yeah.
And if especially an unaware person, like you said, self-awareness, humongous in mental health. But when you're going through trying to better yourself, and then that one trigger that you're not prepared for happens, it's like, oh well, there goes the diet, there goes the exercise,
Yeah.
there goes the sleep. And
Yeah.
it's such a revolving door that just doesn't stop for a lot of people. And definitely feel like it's a message a lot of people need to hear, that not everybody's going to deal with struggles the same way that you deal with them. you
Yeah.
know
And it's all connected. And I would like to add too, there are so many different meditation apps out there too. And some of them are pretty pricey. The best one that I found that I recommend to all of my students is Insight Timer. Insight Timer is really good. It's free. You can always sign up for courses and things like that, but you can actually go up there and just select like a 5-minute meditation, a 10-minute meditation, however much time you have for that day. And it kind of narrows it down, and it's free. So definitely take advantage of that if you're interested in trying to meditate. But
so
it
it's
does,
called
it's
Insight
something you have
Timer.
to make, it's something you have to make a habit, just like, exercising and diet. But yeah, Insight Timer, you can find
Okay,
it in your app store, Play Store, but it's absolutely free.
perfect.
Unless you do want to obviously pay more for courses, but that all those meditations up there are really important. So that when I do meditate, when I am squeezing it in, that's what I'm using.
Nice. So hope for me was always something I held close to my heart before I was able to help my or to get myself the help I needed. And one term you mentioned sticks out to me tremendously, and that's self-actualization, which is realizing one's potential. For those that struggle, how would you go about helping someone find this for themselves, the self-actualization?
Yeah. So, and if you haven't seen this before, anybody, listening hasn't seen this before, definitely go ahead and Google Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it kind of brings up this pyramid. And at the bottom of that pyramid, the goal is we all start at the bottom, right? And we all want to work our way up. So we have just like our basic needs, right? Food, clothing, shelter. And with that, hopefully we can move to the next step of feeling safe and feeling secure. When we feel safe and secure, we feel loved, and we can move up to that next level of feeling like we belong and feeling loved. And the goal is to go all the way up to that top of that chart, which is self-actualization. Now, if we're talking about trauma, right? If we're talking about individuals who maybe didn't have a roof over their head, like some of those basic needs were not met, it's going to be really hard and sometimes more difficult to work your way up that triangle, because if you don't have those basic needs, are you going to have confidence? Are you going to have a good self-esteem? So that term self-actualization actually means like realizing your potential, right? And we I like to think that, that's my goal in life, is I want to be self-actualized. But there are, unfortunately, a lot of people who will most likely never make it to that point in their lives. It takes a lot of soul searching. It takes a lot of insight. It takes a lot of vulnerability to be able to get to that point. But I love that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I learned that in high school, actually. And I'll never forget, we were in class, and Mrs. Funkhauser, who's my favorite teacher, I always talk about her too. we were learning about this, and she said, and I really think that, Tiffany is a really good example of self-actualization. And I was a teenager. And this is just so like of how I am now. I didn't really know what that meant at the time. Now I know I've always been like a 50-year-old woman in a child's body. Like I'm just an old soul, you know what I mean? And just again, just that ability to empathize, that ability, that want to understand, is all really important. So I think working your way up this chart, if you can look at it and you can say, I don't feel like I have love and belonging in my life. Well, that should be a goal for you,
Yeah.
because once you kind of met that goal, you move up to the self-esteem, and then you can be that actualized person, actually kind of recognizing your purpose and living that.
Right. I had added that book to my reading list. I definitely want to check that out, because I feel like it's an interesting perspective on terms of what we as humans require, and just trying to get to that top level of the chart, like you said. And a lot of people just struggle with just the self-esteem part, and that's probably one of the biggest parts. And of course, love and belonging in today's society is so hard, because either you feel like an outcast, or you go through your life alone and just don't know where you belong. And I feel like the most important one for me, well, not most important, because I feel like they're all important, but one that sticks out to me is safety. And a lot of people, I feel like, struggle with that aspect, because either they move around a lot, they don't have the resources to help them overcome whatever demons they're struggling with. And it's so hard for them to even think about the love and belonging part, because they don't feel safe with their environment or who they are as a person. And I kind of feel like that's where a lot of people just kind of stand still at forever, just trying to find a safe space for them.
Yeah,
So
it's so important. I work a lot with the LGBTQ community. I help organize our pride in my town here in Greenville, North Carolina, every year. And really that's what it's all about is, LGBTQ, they have such a high rate of suicide.
right.
And when NAMI first started sponsoring this, I did get some reaction like, well, why is a mental health agency sponsoring LGBTQ? Do they think that we're crazy? I'm like, wait. That's not what it's about at all. It's because we know that a lot of times you don't feel accepted by society.
Yeah.
We want to be able to bring this community together and say, we are accepting of you, and you are loved here, and you belong here just like everyone else.
Absolutely.
I also have a friend who worked with Students Against Destructive Decisions. It's like an after school program with a lot of students. And just like what you were talking about with belonging, there were a group of students who didn't play sports. They weren't in any clubs. They really didn't know where they fit in. And they just kind of started a club, like they named it something silly. And basically everyone who didn't have any clubs or organizations or sports that they felt like they belonged to or fit into, they all joined this club. And really just that sense of belonging and being a part of something was such a confidence builder, was, really help with their self-esteem, and knowing that, they were being surrounded by these other people who, were a lot like them, and they felt accepted and seen.
Right. In my last podcast, I kind of talked about how we've grown as a community in terms of resources, and in terms of just trying to get out the word that mental health is something that society has swept under the rug for so long. And it's great to hear that kids are taking it upon themselves to create groups like that, because that's something we didn't have.
Yeah.
Growing up in the 90s and early 2000s was rough.
Yeah. And we give the kids now like so much, flack for being sensitive, right? But they're going to change the world. They
Yeah.
really, I really, and it's so funny, like, and I really believe that, when I was, when I was a kid in the 90s and early 2000s, I remember seeing all of these issues and being like, oh, I can't wait till I'm an adult and we don't have, we have world peace and none of this stuff exists anymore. But it's always going to be there. And I really just think that the mentality of these younger people today, and everything that they're bringing to the table and saying, look, we do have to talk. We do have to be vulnerable. We have to listen. We do have to worry about words and feelings because they matter. That's what it's all about. So I'm really excited to see just how we, again, break this stigma just going forward in the next 10, 20 years. I think we're going to change the world.
Absolutely. And, one of my favorite sayings that I've heard recently was, let's create a better world for our children. That way when they're all grown up and they're all adults, that we won't have that stigma around mental health anymore, that we'll all be more self-aware for the future and, the future of this generation. And it's good to see that we've grown, but, we've only just scraped the tip of that
Yeah.
iceberg with mental health. And,
Yeah.
having somebody like yourself preach that word every day, and then having our mental health group on Facebook and this podcast, it's a great step, and it's great to see so many people step forward and speak out for the people that are afraid to speak out. Because I know there's so many listening, for that matter, that are scared to speak up, that are scared to even share their story. But I just, I want to echo that message that, it's okay to be feeling the way that you're okay. And it's okay that you're struggling with what you're struggling with, but we will get through this together.
Yeah.
And
hope is hard. Hope can be hard to find, but really we need to cling to hope.
absolutely.
We need to cling to hope.
So before we close out today's session, where can people find you on social media, and where can people find your book?
Yeah, so I am on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Simply Deescalate. I share a lot of mental health resources and tips up there too. I also have a website, TiffanieHerring.com. You can go up there and be linked to the book. The book is on Amazon. And then also just feel free to shoot me a message up there if you're interested in any type of speaking events or consulting. I would love to work with you and your organization. So TiffanieHerring.com, and that's Tiffanie, TiffanieHerring. My mom made me a little different. She didn't want Tiffany with a Y, so Tiffanie with an IE Herring.com, and you'll be linked to my book and anything and every other resource that you could imagine if you follow my socials.
Can you hold up that beautiful book for our listeners and viewers?
Yes, here you go. And there's did you like the pictures, Chris?
I loved it. They're great.
So there are pictures all throughout, and you can see I colored mine. So kind of some self-care there. You can hold on. I got to show you my elephant here. Look at him. This is the active listening chapter.
I love it.
But yeah, thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
A million times over for doing this. And before we close out, I like to read a quote that I find on social media just to read to our viewers. This one didn't have an author on it, but I loved how it was worded. So it goes, "Don't break a bird's wings and tell it how to fly. Don't break a heart and then tell it to love. Don't break a soul and then tell it to be happy. Don't see the worst in a person and expect them to see the best in you. Don't judge people and expect them to stand by your side. Don't play with fire and expect to stay perfectly safe. Life is about giving and taking. You cannot expect to give bad and receive good, and you cannot expect to give good and receive bad."
Powerful.
So I love it.
No judgment, just love.
Exactly. Thank you guys so much for listening. And again, this is Tiffanie Herring. I'm Chris. Make sure that you follow the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and follow our Facebook group at Mental Health Movement. Thank you guys so much. Be gentle with yourselves, and much love to you guys.